In the gilded cage of Graceland, where sequined jumpsuits hung like ghosts of glory, Elvis Presley stared at his reflection and whispered the words that would haunt him forever. "I'll never fall in love again." It was 1973. The divorce papers were signed, and the king of rock and roll had lost his queen. But this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the shattering of a dream that began when a 14-year-old girl walked into his life in Germany, and a promise that would echo through the hollow halls of fame until his final breath. Badnau, Germany, 1959. The autumn air carried the scent of possibility as Priscilla, barely 14, stepped into the party that would change her life forever. Elvis Aaron Presley, 24 and already a legend, stood across the room like a magnetic force of nature. When their eyes met, the world shifted on its axis. "You're just a baby," Elvis had said that first night, his voice a velvet whisper that made her heart race. But even as he spoke those words, something deeper stirred within him, a recognition that this wasn't just another fleeting encounter. This was different. This was dangerous. For 2 years, they wrote letters that burned with passion and innocence. Elvis poured his soul onto paper, confessing fears he'd never shared with anyone. "Sometimes I think the music is all I'll ever have that's real," he wrote. "Everyone else wants Elvis Presley, the idea. But you knew me before I became this thing they made me into." Priscilla treasured every word, every photograph, every promise of a future together. In her teenage heart, she believed in fairy tales. She believed that love could conquer the distance, the age difference, the impossible pressures of his fame. When he asked her to come to Graceland, to be with him, she didn't hesitate. But even in those early days, surrounded by the opulence of Graceland, cracks began to show. Elvis was possessive, controlling, shaping her into his vision of perfection. "You're mine," he would say, and it sounded like love, but felt like ownership. He dictated her clothes, her hair, her very identity, molding her from girl to woman according to his fantasies. The promise he made to her father that he would protect her, care for her, marry her seemed sacred then. Colonel Parker worried about the scandal, the career implications, but Elvis brushed off the concerns. "She's going to be my wife," he declared with the same confidence he brought to the stage. "I'll never need anyone else." Yet even as he spoke those words, the seeds of destruction were planted. The pills that helped him sleep, the ones that kept him awake, the ones that numbed the pressure, they were already whispering their seductive lies. The women who threw themselves at him wherever he went tested his resolve daily. And somewhere deep inside, a voice grew louder with each passing month, a voice that reminded him that everyone he'd ever truly loved had left him, starting with his beloved mother, Gladys. Priscilla saw glimpses of this darkness, moments when Elvis would stare into space with haunted eyes. "What's wrong?" she'd ask, and he'd force that famous smile, pull her close, and promise her the world. But she was learning that promises made in the shadow of fame carried their own weight, their own poison dot, as 1962 faded into 1963, and her 17th birthday approached. Priscilla began to understand that loving Elvis Presley meant loving not just a man, but a mythology. And mythologies, she was learning, had a way of destroying the mortals who dared to believe in them. The promise of forever had been made. Now came the test of whether either of them was strong enough to keep it. Graceland, 1963 to 1967. A mansion stood like a monument to excess and isolation, its gates keeping the world out and its inhabitants trapped within. For Priscilla, now 18 and officially living as Elvis's companion, the grand estate felt increasingly like a beautiful prison, where time moved differently than in the outside world. Elvis had become Pygmalion to her Galatea, sculpting her into his ideal woman with obsessive precision. Every morning brought new instructions. How to style her hair higher, darker. Which makeup would accentuate her features just so. What clothes would complement his vision of feminine perfection. "You're going to be the most beautiful woman in the world," he would say, studying her like an artist, examining his masterpiece. "When we walk into a room, every man should envy me, and every woman should want to be you." But perfection came at a price. Priscilla found herself disappearing, piece by piece, into the image Elvis had created. Her own thoughts, her own dreams, seemed to matter less with each passing day. When she expressed interest in dancing, he discouraged it, too many men around. When she wanted to work, he refused his woman didn't need a job. The world outside Graceland became increasingly foreign, viewed only through the filter of Elvis's paranoia and control. The nights were the hardest. Elvis, fueled by a cocktail of prescription medications, would stay awake until dawn, holding court with his Memphis Mafia, a rotating cast of yes-men and hangers-on who fed his ego and enabled his excesses. Priscilla would sit silently in the corner, watching the man she loved transform into someone she barely recognized. The pills made him alternately manic and morose, brilliant and incoherent. "I can't sleep," he would confess to her in rare moments of vulnerability. "Every time I close my eyes, I see all the people counting on me. The fans, the colonel, my daddy. What if I fail them all? What if I'm not really the king they think I am?" These glimpses of the frightened boy beneath the crown broke her heart, but they became increasingly rare as the chemical fog thickened around him. Meanwhile, the movies kept coming formulaic, hollow productions that buried his musical genius under layers of commercial compromise. Priscilla watched him return from each film shoot more disillusioned, more dependent on the pills that promised to ease the pain of artistic death. "I used to dream of being James Dean," he would mutter, staring at another mindless script. "Now I'm just a singing cartoon character." The promise of marriage hung between them like a carrot on a stick. Colonel Parker worried about the implications. Would marriage hurt Elvis's appeal to female fans? The delay tortured Priscilla, who felt her life suspended in amber, waiting for a future that always seemed just out of reach. By 1967, as her 22nd birthday approached, Priscilla began to realize a devastating truth. Elvis loved the idea of her more than the reality of who she was becoming. And she was disappearing so completely into his fantasy that she wasn't sure there would be anything left to love when the spell finally broke. Golden Cage of Graceland had given her everything she thought she wanted, but it had cost her the one thing she didn't realize she was losing: herself. Las Vegas, May 1st, 1967. The Aladdin Hotel buzzed with nervous energy as Elvis Aaron, Presley, and Priscilla Ann Beaulieu finally exchanged vows after 8 years of courtship, control, and compromise. The ceremony lasted 8 minutes, a brief, almost perfunctory affair, witnessed by a handful of family and friends. Colonel Parker, ever the puppet master, had orchestrated everything down to the minute, ensuring maximum publicity with minimum genuine intimacy. "I guess we're really doing this, baby," Elvis whispered to Priscilla as they stood before the justice of the peace. His smile was radiant for the cameras, but she caught the flicker of something else in his eyes. Not quite fear, but perhaps recognition that this moment, which should have been their triumph, felt somehow hollow. The wedding photos captured a beautiful couple at the height of their fame and youth, but they couldn't capture the underlying tension. Priscilla, stunning in her beaded gown and towering hair, smiled with the perfection Elvis had trained into her. Yet behind those carefully applied lashes, doubt gnawed at her soul. This wasn't the romantic culmination she dreamed of as a teenage girl in Germany. It was a media event, a business transaction dressed in white silk and promises. The honeymoon in Palm Springs offered a brief respite, a glimpse of what their life might have been without the constant pressure of fame. They laughed, made love, and talked about their future like a normal couple. Elvis spoke of slowing down, maybe taking better roles, focusing on their marriage. "We're going to have babies," he promised, his hand on her flat stomach. Beautiful babies who'll grow up normal, not like their crazy daddy. But normalcy was an impossible dream in Elvis's universe. They returned to Graceland and immediately fell back into the old patterns, amplified now by the pressures of being America's couple. Elvis threw himself deeper into his pharmaceutical escape, while Priscilla struggled with the realization that marriage had changed nothing. She was still the perfect accessory, still trapped in the gilded cage, still slowly disappearing. The birth of Lisa Marie on February 1st, 1968, should have been their salvation. For a brief, shining moment, Elvis seemed to find something real again, something pure. He held his daughter with wonder, sang to her with genuine tenderness, and promised to be the father he'd never had. But the demands of his career, the pull of his addictions, and the weight of his own demons proved stronger than even the love he felt for his child. As 1968 became 1969, and the comeback special reminded the world of Elvis's incredible talent. Priscilla watched her husband disappear even further into the myth of himself. The pills, the women, the late-night ramblings about cosmic consciousness and spiritual seeking, it all felt like watching someone drown in slow motion. The man who had promised her forever was systematically destroying himself, and she was helpless to stop it. Each pill he swallowed, each meaningless affair, each moment of rage or paranoia drove another nail into the coffin of their marriage. The promise made in innocence was rotting from within, poisoned by fame, addiction, and the impossible weight of being Elvis Presley. And for the first time, Priscilla began to wonder if love really could conquer all, or if some forces were simply too powerful to overcome. 1971 to 1973, the cracks that had been forming for years finally became chasms too wide to bridge. Elvis, now performing regularly in Las Vegas, had found a new mistress more demanding than any woman: the stage. Night after night, he poured his soul into performances that left him both exhilarated and empty, surrounded by thousands who adored him but understood nothing of the man behind the jumpsuit. Priscilla, meanwhile, had begun the painful process of rediscovering herself. Martial arts classes became her rebellion, a space where she could be strong, focused, and independent. Through karate, she met Mike Stone, a man who saw her as Priscilla, not as Mrs. Elvis Presley. The affair that followed wasn't born of malice, but of desperation. A drowning woman grasping for air. "I know about him," Elvis said one night in early 1972, his voice flat with pills and resignation. He didn't rage or threaten as she'd expected. Instead, he sat in his chair like a broken king, staring at nothing. "I can't even be angry. I did this to us, didn't I?" The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest they'd ever had. Years of resentment, loneliness, and unfulfilled promises poured out between them. Priscilla spoke of feeling like a doll in a museum, perfectly preserved but never truly alive. Elvis confessed his terror of intimacy, his inability to stop destroying everything he touched. "I loved you so much I tried to make you into me," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "But you were perfect, just the way you were that first night in Germany. I was just too scared to see it." The divorce papers were signed on August 15th, 1972, but the real goodbye came months later, in a private moment at Graceland. Lisa Marie was asleep upstairs, and for once the house was quiet. Elvis and Priscilla sat together on the couch where they'd spent countless hours, two people who had loved each other enough to nearly destroy themselves in the process. "I'm going to be alone now," Elvis said, his voice barely audible. "I mean really alone. And I deserve it." "No, you don't," Priscilla replied, taking his hand. "You deserve to be happy. But you have to save yourself. I can't do it for you anymore." As she walked away from Graceland for the last time as his wife, Elvis called out to her, "Scylla, I'll never fall in love again. Not like this. Not this deep. It hurts too much." She turned back to see him silhouetted in the doorway of the mansion that had been both their palace and their prison. "Then don't fall in love the same way," she said. "Learn to love yourself first." The years that followed proved Elvis's words prophetic. He had other relationships, other women who tried to fill the void Priscilla left behind, but none touched the depths of his heart the way she had. The pills took more and more of him, until on August 16th, 1977, they finally claimed what remained. The promise he'd made to never fall in love again was both kept and broken. He'd never love another woman with the intensity he'd felt for Priscilla, but he'd also never learned to love himself enough to survive without her. When Elvis drew his last breath at Graceland, Priscilla was building a new life, free from the golden cage, but forever marked by the depth of what they'd shared. She had kept her promise to protect Lisa Marie, to ensure their daughter knew her father as more than a myth. But she carried with her the weight of understanding that sometimes loving someone means accepting that you can't save them from themselves. "I'll Never Fall in Love Again" became more than a song title. It was Elvis's epitaph, the final testament of a man who loved so deeply it nearly destroyed him. Their story reminds us that even the greatest love stories can be tragedies, and that sometimes the most profound act of love is knowing when to let go. Ready to explore more legendary love stories that shaped music history? Discover the untold tales of romance, passion, and heartbreak that inspired the greatest songs ever written. Subscribe now for exclusive access to the intimate stories behind the music that moved the world.